I never thought the sound of a heart monitor could change the entire direction of my life. But the truth is, everything that mattered, the man I believed I was, the future I thought I had, the woman I planned to marry, everything shattered the moment I opened that hospital door. And even now, retelling this, my hands tremble the same way they did that day. If you're listening to this, don't just imagine it. Feel it. Because I swear to you, some truths arrive so violently that they rip something out of you, something you never quite get back. It started with something simple. A bouquet. White lilies, my mother's favorite. I was clutching them so tightly that the stems were bending under my fingers. I was walking through Columbia Presbyterian Hospital in Manhattan, thinking I was surprising her, thinking she'd smile when she saw me early, thinking I was doing something thoughtful for the woman who gave me everything. I wasn't supposed to walk in then. I wasn't supposed to hear that choked sound, or that frantic beeping. I wasn't supposed to see what I saw. But fate, life, whatever force moves quietly behind the scenes, had other plans for me that day. My mother, Michelle, had pneumonia, serious but treatable. That morning I had held her hand, kissed her forehead, told her I'd be back after my meetings. She'd said, "Go. Do what you need to do, sweetheart. I'll be fine." And Audrey, my fiancée, had smiled softly and promised she'd stay with her until I returned. "Focus on your work, Justin," she'd said. "I'll take care of her." God, I trusted her more than I should have, more than she deserved. I finished my meetings early, feeling good for the first time in days. Relief, hope, gratitude. They all blended into this warm rush in my chest. I pictured the look on my mother's face when I walked in early, flowers in hand, telling her she wasn't alone, that I was there, that no matter how busy I was, I'd always come back. The elevator ride to the ICU felt longer than usual. I could feel the weight of the lilies in my hand, the way they brushed against my suit jacket. When I stepped out, everything was bathed in a soft golden light pouring through the windows. It felt almost peaceful, calm, a place where healing was happening. I walked down the hallway toward room 412. Then I heard it, a muffled struggle, a sound that didn't belong in a hospital room, a frantic beep, beep, beep of a heart monitor racing in panic. Something primitive in my chest tightened, like the world snapped out of place but hadn't told me yet. I ran. My hand slammed against the door. I pushed it open, and the moment the room came into view, the universe cracked. Audrey, my Audrey, was standing over my mother's bed. Her back hunched, both hands gripping a white hospital pillow, pressing it down, hard, over my mother's face. My mother's frail fingers clawed at Audrey's wrists. Her legs trembled beneath the sheets. Her chest fought violently for air she could not get. And Audrey's face. Christ, I didn't know that face. Her expression was twisted with something cold and calculated. Not fear, not panic, but determination. A chilling, terrifying resolve. The flowers slipped from my hand and scattered across the floor. I didn't recognize my own voice when it tore out of me. "What are you doing?" Audrey's head snapped toward me. The pillow slipped from her hands. My mother gasped, a broken, desperate gasp that will haunt me for the rest of my life. For a moment, everything went silent, like the world stopped breathing. My mother's chest convulsed as air returned to her lungs, the heart monitor screaming back to life. My brain couldn't catch up with what my eyes had seen. This wasn't the woman who laughed against my neck at night. Not the woman who cried when I proposed. Not the woman who said she wanted to grow old with me. No. This was someone else entirely. Someone I had let into our lives. Someone who had just tried to kill my mother. My body moved before my mind could. I rushed across the room, shoving Audrey away so hard she slammed against the wall. I placed myself between them, shielding my mother with my body. Her breaths were wild and shallow, her fingers reaching for me like she wasn't sure I was real. "Mom," I whispered, my voice breaking as I held her face. "I'm here. I'm here. Breathe for me. Please." Her eyes fluttered open. Terror swam inside them. She tried to speak, but only choked sounds came out. Behind me, Audrey stood frozen. Her hands held up, trembling. Not with guilt, but with fear. Fear for herself. She knew I saw. She knew there was no way out. Two nurses burst into the room. One rushed to my mother, adjusting her oxygen mask, checking vitals, barking orders. The other looked between me and Audrey, eyes narrowing like she'd walked straight into a nightmare. "What happened?" the nurse demanded. I turned. And for the first time since I walked in, I truly looked at Audrey. Her perfect blonde hair was messy, her face flushed, her pupils shaken. And yet there was no remorse. Only calculation. A flicker of regret, not for what she did, but for being caught. "She tried to suffocate my mother," I said, my voice low, steady, cold. The nurse stiffened. "Security!" she shouted down the hallway. Audrey panicked. No, you don't understand. She was choking. I was trying to help her sit up." "You were smothering her," I screamed. Tears spilled down Audrey's cheeks. She stepped toward me, hands shaking. "Justin, please. I love you." Her voice cracked. It wasn't love. It was desperation. Fear of losing whatever she was trying to secure. Two security guards stormed in, grabbing her by the arms. "Ma'am, you need to come with us." "Justin," she screamed. "Please, you don't know what you saw. She was going to ruin everything." My spine went cold. Ruin everything? "What did you say?" I asked. Audrey froze. Her face crumpled. She knew she'd said too much. The guards dragged her away as she sobbed. "Justin, please, don't let them do this. I did it for us. I did it because I love you." I didn't follow her. I didn't answer her. I didn't move. I sat down beside my mother's bed, held her shaking hand in mine, and listened as her breathing slowly steadied under the oxygen mask. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Minutes. Hours. Time didn't exist. All I knew was this. If I had arrived 5 minutes later, my mother would be dead. And the woman who tried to kill her was the same woman whose ring was still on my mother's finger, because she insisted on showing the nurses that her future daughter-in-law cared. If you're still with me, tell me in the comments, what do you think you would have done if you walked into that room? And don't forget to hit like so more people can hear this story, because it still hurts to say it out loud. I wish I could tell you that after they dragged Audrey out of that room, everything became clear. That I instantly understood who she really was, what she'd done, and why. But that's not how it works in real life. When you're standing in the wreckage of the life you thought you had, clarity doesn't come in a clean line. It comes in flashes, fragments, moments you ignored, suddenly replaying in your head like scenes you should have paused and studied, but didn't. Sitting there beside my mother's bed, fingers wrapped around her frail hand, I felt my mind doing something strange. It didn't stay in that room. It didn't stay in the hospital. It went backwards. It reached for the roots of how I ended up here, watching security guards drag my fiancé out of an ICU while my mother fought for breath. Because the truth is, that scene didn't start in room 412. It started years earlier, long before I ever met Audrey. It started with who I was, and what I believed I had to do to be loved. I grew up in Queens in a small apartment that always smelled faintly like coffee and whatever cheap cleaning products my mother brought home from the night job. My father left when I was 7. He didn't leave a note. He didn't sit me down and explain. One day he was there complaining about money, slamming drawers. The next day his side of the closet was empty and my mother was standing in the kitchen staring at a stack of unpaid bills, holding a dish towel like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I remember the sound of that silence more than I remember the sound of the door closing. My mother didn't cry in front of me, not once. At least, not that I saw. Instead, she got to work. She took double shifts at the hospital as a nurse during the day and cleaned office buildings at night. Some weeks I saw her more in passing than in conversation. When I woke up, she'd be there, putting cereal and toast on the table. When I fell asleep, she'd be ironing her scrubs at the small kitchen counter. She was tired. God, she was tired. But somehow she always smiled at me like I was worth every ache in her bones. "Remember this," she'd say sometimes, tapping her chest. "No one can take what you carry in here. Not money, not titles, not even your last name." I didn't fully understand what she meant back then. All I knew was that she was everything. My hero, my anchor, my proof that you could be abandoned and still stand. When I got into business school, she cried for the first time in front of me. Real tears, sliding down her cheeks as she held the acceptance letter in her hands like it was a miracle. "You're going to be somebody," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You're going to go places I never could." I remember the way she said it. Like my success was going to fix something inside her that life had broken years ago. Like if I made it, none of the sacrifices she made would have been in vain. So I worked, and worked, and worked. I built my first startup in grad school. It wasn't glamorous. I was coding in a cramped apartment, eating cheap noodles, sleeping 4 hours a night. But I had this fire in me. This need to prove that I wasn't just the kid whose dad walked out and whose mom scrubbed floors so he could dream. By the time I was 32, I'd taken my company public. By 38, the word billionaire started appearing next to my name in articles I didn't even know existed. People started treating me differently. Waiters, investors, strangers at events who suddenly knew my biography down to the detail. I had a penthouse in Manhattan. I had a car I barely drove. I had more money than I knew what to do with. The first thing I really did after the IPO wasn't to buy a yacht or some ridiculous car. It was to buy my mother a house. Not a mansion. A house with a little yard and a quiet neighborhood where she could sleep through the night without sirens outside her window. She stood in the driveway, staring at it, shaking her head. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. "Yes, you do," I said. "You deserve more than this. This is me just starting to pay you back." But that's the thing. Money can pay bills. It can change zip codes. It can buy comfort. It cannot pay back years of sacrifice. It cannot buy time you missed. It cannot change what you believe you have to do to prove you're worth loving. Even with all the success, I felt it, a quiet, heavy weight just under my ribs. The sense that I was constantly performing. That if I stopped achieving, if I stopped winning, if I stopped growing the empire, everything would collapse and people would see I was just that kid from Queens again. The one whose father left. The one whose mother worked her body into the ground to keep the lights on. In boardrooms, I felt powerful. In empty hotel rooms, I felt hollow. I dated, of course. Women who loved the lifestyle. Women who said the right things, wore the right dresses, laughed at the right jokes. Some of them were kind. Some of them were openly transactional. A few might have cared about me. But I never shook the suspicion that if I lost everything tomorrow, most of them would be gone before the dust settled. So when I say I was lonely, I don't mean no one texted me back. I mean I was surrounded by people and still felt unknown. I mean I could buy tickets to anywhere in the world and yet had no idea where I actually belonged. Then I met Audrey. If I'm being honest, I didn't even want to go to that charity gala. It was one of those polished Manhattan events, ballroom, crystal chandeliers, people clinking glasses while they talked about impact and giving back with one eye on the cameras. My assistant insisted I attend. "Good PR," she said. "Plus your name's on the donations list." So I went. I put on the suit, smiled at the right people, shook hands with donors and board members, and did what I always did, played the part of the successful, composed, unshakable Justin Miller. And then I heard a laugh. Not the fake kind, not the networking kind. A real one. I turned and saw her standing near the bar, talking to one of the organizers. The man said something, I still don't know what, and she threw her head back and laughed like she'd forgotten she was in a room full of expensive dresses and borrowed jewelry. It caught me off guard. She didn't look around to see who was watching her, She wasn't performing. At least that's what I believed then. Her dress wasn't the most expensive in the room, but it fit her like it had been made for her. She wore minimal jewelry. Her hair was pulled back in a way that made her look both elegant and strangely approachable. There was something warm about her. Or maybe there was something hungry in me that needed her to look that way. I found myself walking toward her before I even decided to. When the organizer moved away, I stepped in. "You actually care about this," I said. She turned, surprised, then smiled. "About what?" "About the charity," I said. "About the cause." You didn't look bored. That's rare in here. Her smile softened. "Why else would I be here?" "Most people come for the networking," I said. "And you?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Honestly?" I said. "Guilt." She laughed again. "At least you're honest." We talked. Not about money or deals, but about the nonprofit's mission. About kids in underfunded schools. About how unfair it was that zip code could decide so much of a child's future. She told me she worked in event planning, mostly for charities and small nonprofits. "It doesn't make me rich," she said, shrugging, "but it makes me feel like what I do matters." She didn't ask what I did until halfway through the conversation. When I told her, she just nodded. "That's nice," she said. "But what do you care about?" Do you know how long it had been since someone asked me that? That night we talked until the staff started clearing tables. When I offered to call her a car, she laughed and said, "Relax, I'm not a damsel. I can grab a cab." She took my number but didn't text me that night. She waited 2 days, long enough for me to wonder if I'd imagined the connection. Our first date was at a small restaurant in Brooklyn, not one of the high-end places my usual dates suggested. She insisted on splitting the check. "This isn't an investment meeting," she joked when I tried to pay. "It's dinner." I told myself she was different, that she didn't care about my money, that she liked me for me. You see how easy it was for me to believe that? When you've spent years feeling like love has to be earned, the moment someone acts like it doesn't, you cling to them like a lifeline. Months passed, like weeks. Long walks through Central Park. Dinners where we talked until the restaurant closed. Texts that started early and ended late. She remembered little things. My favorite coffee order. The story about my worn-out sneakers in high school. The way my mother used to dance in the kitchen when she thought no one was watching. She met my mother 3 months into the relationship. I drove Audrey out to the house I'd bought in that quiet neighborhood outside the city. My mother opened the door in a simple sweater and jeans, wiped her hands on a dish towel, and hugged me like I'd been gone for months instead of a week. When she saw Audrey, her eyes lit up. "So this is the woman who's been stealing my son's attention," she said, teasing. Audrey smiled, a little shy, a little charmed. "I promise I'm giving it back to him in good condition," she said. They hit it off. At least, that's what it looked like. My mother asked about her work, her family, her dreams. Audrey answered with that perfect mix of vulnerability and strength. She talked about growing up middle class, about working hard, about wanting to build something meaningful. She helped my mother clear the dishes after dinner. She laughed at her stories. She was polite, attentive, warm. When we left that night, my mother hugged her and said, "You're always welcome here." On the drive back to the city, I felt lighter than I had in years. It felt like 2 parts of my life were finally fitting together, the empire I'd built and the woman who made it feel less empty. But later, when I called to check on my mother, she hesitated. "She's lovely," my mom said. "But," I replied automatically, hearing it in her tone. My mother paused. "You've grown up a lot, Justin. You don't need me to tell you what to do." "What is it?" I pressed. "I just think you're moving fast," she said gently. "That's all. Fast emotions can feel like deep ones. I just want you to see clearly, not through fear of being alone." I bristled. "I'm 45, Mom. I know what I'm doing." "I'm not saying you don't," she said quickly. "I just feel something I can't quite name yet. And as your mother, I have to pay attention to that. I remember sighing, changing the subject. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want anyone poking holes in the story I'd started telling myself, that after all the years of hard work, sleepless nights, and lonely dinners, life had finally rewarded me with a love that was simple, easy, pure. Looking back now, I can see what she was trying to tell me. Sometimes the people who love you most see the cracks before you do. Sometimes your ego calls it interference when it's actually protection. If you're listening to this and you've ever had someone gently question a relationship you were sure about, don't hate them for it, at least not right away. Sometimes they're seeing a pattern you're too deep inside to recognize. 5 months after that first dinner I proposed, we were on the terrace of my penthouse. The city stretched out beneath us in a sea of lights. Audrey stood at the edge, wrapped in my jacket, the wind lifting strands of her hair. She looked perfect. Like the final piece of a puzzle I'd been building my whole life. I don't want to do this without you, I said. The life, the empire, any of it. I want you in it. Permanently. I knelt. Her hands flew to her mouth. Her eyes filled with tears. Yes, she whispered. Yes, of course. I slid the ring onto her finger. It glittered in the city lights. For a moment, I let myself believe I'd made it. Not just financially, emotionally, spiritually. I had love. I had success. I had my mother alive to see it all. A week later, Audrey brought up a prenup over coffee. I want you to know I love you, she said, fingers wrapped around her mug. Not what you have. If you want a prenup, I'll sign it. No questions asked. I shook my head. I don't need that. I trust you. For a split second, something flickered across her face. I couldn't name it then. Frustration? Disappointment? Calculation? It was there and gone in an instant. If you're sure, she said, smiling as she squeezed my hand. I was sure. Or I convinced myself I was. Now sitting in that hospital room, listening to my mother's shaky breaths, I replayed that moment over and over. How she'd offered to protect me from something she needed access to. How I'd proudly refused, thinking I was proving how much I trusted her. How my need to believe in a love without conditions made me blind to the conditions she was already setting. If this is hitting a nerve for you, press pause for a second and ask yourself, have you ever ignored a strange little flicker in your gut because you were afraid that listening to it might cost you the love, attention, or approval you were craving? I did, and it almost cost my mother her life. And I hadn't even told you yet about the day she collapsed, the pneumonia, and how Audrey volunteered to help by visiting her every afternoon while I worked. That even now is the part that makes my chest tighten the most, because I thanked her for it. I hugged her for it. I told her it meant the world to me. I had no idea I was thanking the same woman who would soon stand over my mother's bed with a pillow in her hands. When I think back to those days right before everything exploded, right before I opened that door and saw Audrey with that pillow, it feels like standing on the edge of a cliff I didn't know existed. I can see myself so clearly now, walking toward it with calm, steady steps, believing the ground was solid, believing love was real, believing I was safe. And I can see her too. Audrey, smiling, caring, loving, or pretending to. I didn't know then that every afternoon she spent with my mother wasn't an act of kindness. It was reconnaissance, preparation, strategy, and for 3 days straight, I didn't see the signs. I didn't question her occasional nervousness or the way she seemed calmer when I updated her about changes in my schedule. I didn't notice how her questions about the hospital's routines grew more specific. What time nurses rotated, when doctors did rounds, how long families were allowed to stay. I told myself she was being supportive, invested, thoughtful. God, I was wrong. 3 days before the incident, something happened that my mother told me only after she recovered. Something that should have warned all of us, if she'd been strong enough to speak up, or if I'd been willing to listen. It was 2:15 in the afternoon, the second day of my mother's ICU stay. Michelle was awake but exhausted. Her breathing was shallow but stable. Audrey walked in wearing a soft beige sweater, carrying a small bouquet of yellow daisies. She smiled gently, set them down, and pulled her chair close to the bed. "How are you feeling today?" Audrey asked with a tenderness I used to believe was real. "Tired," my mother whispered. "But I'll be all right." "Of course you will," Audrey replied. "You're strong." They talked for a while. Small talk mostly. The weather. A nurse Michelle liked. My recent business meeting. My mother had always been someone who could sense emotions beneath words, and she sensed something off in Audrey that day. A stiffness in her smile, a tension in her shoulders, a flicker of something cold behind her eyes. So my mother decided to speak her heart. "Audrey, I've been thinking," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Maybe you and Justin should postpone the wedding a little, just until I'm well enough to be present, for both of you." Audrey froze. "Oh," she said lightly, but her voice had a tremor. "If that's what you think is best." "It's just that you've both been under a lot of pressure," my mother continued. "Justin works too much. You're planning a wedding. I'm here, slowing everything down. I just want you to have real time together before rushing toward something permanent." "What kinds of things?" Audrey asked stiffly. "Hard conversations," my mother said gently. "Family, priorities, money, dreams, sacrifices. Marriage isn't just about love, it's about truth." My mother reached for her hand. "And honestly, sweetheart, I worry Justin might be moving fast because he wants so badly to believe he's found something pure. And I don't want either of you to wake up 5 years from now feeling trapped." Audrey didn't respond. She didn't blink. Her jaw tightened. My mother felt it. That shift, a subtle drop in the temperature of the room. "You don't think I'm right for him?" Audrey whispered. "I didn't say that," my mother replied softly. "But you mean it." "No," my mother said. "I mean that I love my son. And I want him to choose love for the right reasons, not out of fear of being alone, not because he feels he has to prove anything. That's all. That's all. A mother's love wrapped in caution. But for someone who'd built her entire future around securing a wealthy husband as fast as possible, that wasn't all. It was a threat." Audrey stood abruptly, clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles whitened. "I should go," she said. "Let you rest." My mother nodded. "I'm not trying to hurt you, Audrey. I'm trying to protect him. From me. From rushing. From anything that isn't ready." Audrey gave a tight smile that did not reach her eyes. Then she left. My mother lay in that bed afterward, staring at the ceiling, her stomach twisting with something she couldn't name. She wanted to tell me. She wanted to say something is wrong, but she was afraid of sounding controlling, afraid I'd think she just didn't want me to marry anyone, afraid to damage the trust between us. 3 months earlier, I had snapped at her for warning me about a former girlfriend who turned out to be after my money. I apologized later, but I think she still carried that memory like a bruise. She didn't want to make the same mistake, so she kept quiet. And Audrey left the hospital that afternoon with a decision growing like poison in her chest. Michelle Miller was the problem, and problems, according to Audrey, could be eliminated. The day before the attack, my mother tried again to talk to me. We were sitting in her hospital room after visiting hours. The soft beeping of monitors filled the silence. She looked pale, weak, like the pneumonia was draining something deeper than her lungs. "Justin," she said quietly, "I need to talk to you about Audrey." I shook my head instantly. "Mom, please, not now." Her eyes softened. "It's important." "She's been nothing but supportive," I said sharply. "She's been here every day while I'm swamped with work. She's trying, Mom. She really cares." My mother's shoulders slumped the tiniest bit. Not enough to accuse, just enough to warn. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "please listen." But I didn't, and she stopped trying. That night, she told me later, she lay awake staring at the ceiling thinking, I need to say something. But she was too tired, and she didn't want to fight with me. So she prayed, not in a dramatic way, but the simple kind only mothers use. Please let him see what I see. The next afternoon, Audrey came for her usual visit. My mother said she noticed something different about her from the moment she walked in. Audrey didn't wear makeup that day. Her hair wasn't styled. Her clothes looked rushed. Her eyes were puffy like she'd been crying, over stress or fear or maybe finalizing a decision she'd been resisting. They talked very little. When my mother finally drifted to sleep, she said she woke once to find Audrey staring at her. Not in concern, not in love, but in calculation, like she was measuring something, timing something, planning something. My mother closed her eyes again, pretending to sleep, and Audrey simply sat there, waiting. Meanwhile, I was at a meeting midtown, a meeting that could have changed the direction of my company, a meeting I prepared for weeks, a meeting that, according to my assistant, absolutely could not be interrupted. But right before it began, my phone buzzed, a number I didn't recognize. Columbia Presbyterian ICU. An instinct slammed through me. Something primal. Something deep. Something that made my chest tighten and my pulse spike. I almost silenced the call. I almost followed the script. I almost chose the empire over the person who built the foundation beneath it. But something made me step out of the boardroom and answer. "Mr. Miller?" a nurse said. "Your mother's vitals are unstable. You might want to come sooner than later." I didn't remember grabbing my coat. I didn't remember telling my assistant to reschedule the meeting. I didn't remember the cab ride, the traffic, the way my heart hammered in my ears. I only remember running and arriving early. Earlier than Audrey expected. Earlier than she planned. Earlier than she prepared for. If that nurse hadn't called, if my instinct hadn't screamed at me, if I'd ignored that pull, I would have walked into a room with flowers and found a body instead of a mother. Sometimes life hands you warnings softly, and when you ignore those, it hands them to you violently. Hours after the attack, after Audrey was taken into custody and my mother had stabilized, 2 detectives approached me in the hallway. One was a tall man in his 50s with tired eyes. The other was a woman with gray streaks in her hair, her wedding ring glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Mr. Miller," she said gently, "I know this is a difficult time, but we need to ask you some questions." I nodded numbly. "Can you walk us through what you witnessed?" I told them everything. The pillow, the struggle, the desperation in my mother's eyes, the expression, cold, intent, on Audrey's face. The words she'd spoken that shattered whatever I thought was real between us. She said my mother was going to ruin everything. I whispered. The detective paused her pen. "Ruin what?" "I don't know," I said. She didn't get to finish. The detectives exchanged a look, one that told me they knew something I didn't yet. The female detective leaned forward slightly. "We've already spoken to your mother," she said quietly. She confirmed she felt threatened by Miss Hill. That Miss Hill's demeanor changed drastically when your mother suggested postponing the wedding. I swallowed hard. "But there's more," the detective continued. "We searched Miss Hill's apartment with her consent." My stomach twisted. "She's in severe financial distress," the detective said. "Over $180,000 in credit card debt, collection letters, eviction notices. Her event planning business filed for bankruptcy months ago." Her words hit me like punches. No. It couldn't be. Not her. Not Audrey. But the detective wasn't finished. "We also found evidence she researched you extensively before you met," she said. "Your companies, your past relationships, your donation patterns, even the events you usually attend." I stared at her. "That charity gala where you two met," she said gently. "She knew you'd be there." A single sentence can break a man in ways nothing else can. Our meeting wasn't fate. It wasn't timing. It wasn't two people connecting in truth. It was strategy, a plan, a hunt. My knees felt weak. I had to lean against the wall just to stay upright. "She didn't love me," I whispered. "She needed me." The detective nodded. "We believe she feared your mother might influence you to delay the wedding or reconsider it. Given her financial situation, that delay could have been devastating to her. So she tried to kill her," I said, my voice cracking, "just to keep the timeline." I pressed my palms against my eyes, but the tears came anyway. I felt humiliated. I felt stupid. I felt used. I felt angry. I felt every emotion that exists between heartbreak and betrayal. But above all, I felt guilt. Guilt so heavy it crushed my chest, because I brought her into our lives. I defended her. I trusted her. I ignored the soft warnings from the one person who loved me unconditionally. My mother almost died because I was too busy needing to believe I had finally found love. And that realization was a wound deeper than any financial loss Audrey could have caused. If you're still here with me, if you're hearing this part, tell me in the comments if you've ever trusted someone so much that you dismissed the warnings of someone who loved you more. I need to know I'm not the only one who's made that mistake. Because this is where everything in me began to break, and where the hardest part of the story begins. The night after Audrey was arrested, I didn't sleep at all. I sat beside my mother's bed in the dim hospital light, holding her hand in both of mine like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to this world. Every beep of the monitor felt like a countdown, not to a medical emergency, but to the moment when I'd finally have to face what had happened, what I had allowed to get so close, what nearly stole the person who mattered most to me. My mother slept in short, uneven breaths, the oxygen mask fogging with every exhale. I kept brushing her hair back, whispering things I wasn't even sure she could hear. "I'm here. I'm not leaving. I'm right here." I don't know when those whispers stopped being for her and started being for me. At around 4 a.m., I walked to the hospital bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and stared at myself in the mirror. My reflection didn't look like the billionaire from magazine covers or interviews. It didn't look like the confident CEO who made hard decisions without blinking. It looked like a scared child who didn't know how he'd let the darkness get this close. When I went back into the room, my mother was awake. Her eyes tracked me instantly, as if she'd been waiting. "Justin," she said, her voice raspy beneath the mask. I rushed to her side. "Don't try to talk. You need to rest." Her hand tightened around mine with surprising strength. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The words hit me harder than anything Audrey ever did. "No," I said, shaking my head. "Mom, no. Don't say that." "I should have told you sooner," she whispered. I felt something was wrong. Something wasn't right about her. But I didn't want to push you away. I didn't want you to think I was jealous or meddling. I didn't want to be your father. Hearing her say that cracked something inside me. "You are nothing like him," I said fiercely. "Nothing. Don't ever compare yourself to that man." Her eyes softened. "Still, I should have told you. I should have fought harder." I shook my head, feeling my throat tighten. "I'm the one who didn't listen. I'm the one who ignored you. I'm the one who brought her into our lives." She cupped the side of my face with her trembling hand. "Justin, you loved with an open heart. That is not a weakness. That is why you are who you are." I let out a shaky breath, leaning my forehead against hers. "I almost lost you. But you didn't." "I almost did." "But you didn't," she repeated, her voice gentle but firm. "Because something inside you knew to come back. You listened to that voice even when everything else said stay at work. That instinct, That was love, and love protected us both. I cried then, quietly. Not the violent kind of crying that tears you apart, but the silent one that cleans something heavy you've been carrying for too long. I held her hand like it was the only steady thing in a world that had been shaking beneath me for days. A little after sunrise, the doctor came in and told me my mother was stable enough to move out of the ICU. She'd need monitoring, but she was out of immediate danger. I felt my knees weaken with relief. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "I'm not leaving you. I'm taking time off from everything." My mother tried to protest, she always did, but I silenced her gently. "There's nothing in my life more important than you," I said. "Not now. Not ever." When I stepped into the hallway, my assistant was calling, texting, practically begging for updates about the meetings I'd missed. I looked down at those notifications, names of investors, board members, people I used to bend my entire life around, and instead of anxiety, I felt nothing. I typed one message. "Family emergency. I'm taking leave. Handle things without me. I'll be back when I'm ready." I hit send, and for the first time in 15 years, I felt free. The next day, the detectives returned with new updates. Audrey had agreed to talk, not out of guilt, out of fear. Fear of losing everything she worked for, fear of losing me, fear of being seen as something other than the perfect woman she pretended to be. I watched them question her through the glass of the tiny police room. Her hands were cuffed in front of her. Her mascara was smeared. Her hair was messy. Her voice trembled, not with remorse, but with frustration that the world wasn't bending the way she thought it would. "She was poisoning him against me," Audrey insisted. "She kept telling him to slow down, to wait. I worked so hard to get here. I spent years positioning myself, going to the right events, meeting the right people." The detective's voice was calm. "So you tried to suffocate her?" "No," Audrey said sharply. "I just snapped. She was going to ruin everything. Everything I built." Everything I built. Those words replayed in my mind over and over. She didn't fall in love with me. She built toward me. I wasn't her partner. I was her project. When the detective finally said, "Audrey Hill, you are under arrest for attempted murder," Audrey looked at me through the glass. "Justin," she cried, "don't let them do this. We can fix this. I did it because I love you." The look in her eyes wasn't love. It was possession. It was desperation. It was the realization that her plan had collapsed. I walked away from that glass and never looked back. The following weeks were a strange mix of peace and pain. I moved my mother into my penthouse temporarily. I hired a nurse, but I insisted on doing most things myself, warming her soup, reading to her, helping her walk down the hallway with her hand on my arm. We talked for hours about my childhood, about her dreams, about the things she never told me. One evening, she sat wrapped in a blanket on my terrace, breathing the cool air slowly but steadily. The sun was setting behind the skyline, painting everything in pink and gold. She looked stronger, softer, alive. "You know," she said quietly, "Audrey didn't break you." I frowned. "It feels like she did." "No," my mother said, shaking her head gently. "She just revealed a part of you that needed healing. A part of you that believed you had to earn love, that you had to perform for it, that you had to prove yourself worthy." Her words struck something deep inside me, a truth I didn't want to face. "You will love again," she said. "But next time, you won't love from loneliness. You'll love from fullness." I didn't speak. I just stared at the skyline, realizing how much my world had revolved around things that didn't matter. Status, wealth, success. When the person who mattered most had been almost taken from me while I chased more zeros on a screen. My mother rested her head on my shoulder. "You saved my life," she whispered. "You saved mine every day for 45 years, I whispered back. She smiled. "Then we're even." We sat there as the city lights came on one by one. Cars moved like veins through the streets below. People laughed in apartments we couldn't see. The world continued beating, unaware of how close I'd come to losing everything. I realized something then. Something I think a lot of us forget. We chase so much outside ourselves. Money, validation, perfect love stories. But the things that save us are usually the quiet ones. The people who show up without applause. The moments that pull us back from the edge. The instincts we ignore too often. Sometimes life whispers warnings, and sometimes when you refuse to listen, life raises its voice. If I had arrived 5 minutes later, you wouldn't be hearing this story. But I did arrive. Something, instinct, intuition, life, God, whatever you want to call it, pulled me back to that hospital room at the exact moment I needed to be there. Maybe that's not magic. Maybe it's mercy. 3 months later, Audrey accepted a plea deal. 7 years in prison for aggravated assault. She'll serve time. She'll get therapy. Maybe she'll find out why she became capable of something like that. Maybe she'll heal. I hope she does. But not for me. For her. Because carrying that kind of emptiness is a life sentence all on its own. Now, when I walk past my mother cooking breakfast in my kitchen, humming to herself and alive, I feel something I haven't felt since I was a kid. Peace. Real peace. The kind that doesn't depend on money or success or romance. The kind that comes from surviving what should have broken you and choosing not to be bitter. I'm not the same man who proposed to Audrey. I'm softer. But I'm stronger too, because my strength isn't wrapped in pride anymore. It's wrapped in truth. And if you're listening to this, maybe that truth is for you too. If this story touched something in you, even a small part, hit like so more people can hear it. And tell me in the comments. Have you ever ignored a warning sign in a relationship because you wanted the love more than the truth? What did life try to show you? Because sometimes the lesson doesn't show up gently. Sometimes it kicks the door open, shatters the illusion, and forces you to choose, stay blind, or finally see. And the right people, the ones who truly love you, they'll always want you to see.